Hi, this is Marianne, and I'm from the Wagon Quilt Company. Today we'll be doing our second block of the month with Around the Corner. It's a quilt design by Wendy Williams. And we'll be talking about doing the orange pills for the quilt. This is really a fun block, and I think you'll really enjoy doing it. I have a few tips and tricks that might help you out as you're doing your block. Last month we did the centerpiece of the quilt, and that's really a fun one because you can use your creativity and do a lot of fun things that are different than the next person, and so yours can be unique to you. This block is more straightforward. We're just doing orange pills, and it will be the next border around the center part of your quilt. The first thing that I would suggest, and the way that I did my orange pills on this quilt, is I used the wash away applique sheets, and they come in a package like this. And this seemed to be a really nice way to do these orange pills for me. If you have another method that works for you, that's great. And I'll show you how I did it with these wash away applique sheets. Using these, what you do is you take the sheet and place it over the pattern, and you can see through it, so you can trace it through. You could use a friction pen, or you could use a pencil and just trace the orange pills. Now with this method, what you'll have to do is actually trace enough of these for each of the peels on the whole quilt. So that means you'll have to trace 76 peels. So you'll need more than one sheet of paper. I've just traced one on here, and it's kind of hard to see it. But I'm just going to cut out my peel and try to be pretty accurate, because this will be exactly the shape of your peel on your quilt. So it takes a little bit of time. Watch a good movie or something while you're tracing these and cutting them out. So there's my peel right there. There is a fusible side to this wash away applique paper, and so you can see it. It has a little bit of shine to it. So what I'll do is take this and iron it to the coordinating piece of fabric. Now I just have a scrap piece of fabric that I'm going to show you today, and I don't have an iron right here, but instead I can use a little bit of glue. Glue works nicely sometimes. So I can stick it on there, and then I'll take my scissors and cut just a scant 1/4 of an inch around that piece of wash away applique sheet. It doesn't have to be perfect. And then you can use a regular glue pen, like glue stick like this one, or there are some that are made especially for fabric that work beautifully also. And I just put a little bit of glue around the 1/4 inch seam here, and do just a little bit of time. These orange pills are really nice because it's just a nice smooth little curve, and so they work up really quite quickly. And I'll just fold over that fabric on to that wash away applique sheet. My glue stick's about gone here, but I think it'll work. And I'll just wrap it around, and it'll stick to that paper. Let me set it down here. And sometimes you just have to manipulate it a little bit so it looks nice and straight. So there's one side of it that I folded down. And then it does have instructions in your pattern for how large you're going to cut your pieces of fabric for the border here. I actually did mine wrong. The fabric that is supposed to be the background for this border is a different one, and I did it wrong, so I had to do them twice. So this is actually the background here. So I have an example to show you of the wrong ones. So cut them the size that it tells you in the pattern. They'll be 6.5 by 24.5. So it will be this size. And then for the placement of your orange peels, I actually just folded it in half and then folded it in half again, taking into account the seam allowance, the 1/4 inch seam allowance. So these will be a 6-inch, this will be 6 inches right here. And I just pressed it lightly, and that gave me the area that I should use to put my orange peel in. Another thing you could do is take that 6-inch square and with a friction pen, just draw a cross line like this, across, and then you have exact place to place these peels on there. I like to just glue them on there, and then I did just a hand applique, but you could also very easily do a machine applique with this method. And if you're comfortable with machine applique, that's a great way to do it too. I'm not as comfortable doing things with the machine, but if you are, this would be a great block to use your machine applique. In your kit that you'll get this month, there are a lot of green and blue fabrics, and I just did a random placement of them so they weren't placed together. Each peel will be a different fabric, but these fabrics will also be used for the borders on your quilt. So use a nice selection of them for this border, and then save the rest of them for the outside border for your quilt. In this month's kit, you will also get some little pieces of wool, and in the pattern she has done the little circles in between the orange peels with a little fussy cut bird. And since that was something that we weren't able to find, I'm sure that this pattern was done or made several years ago, and we don't have access to little birds that are exactly the right size. Instead, I use little wool circles or little pennies. There is a template in your pattern to do the pennies, and I did one that size, and then I did one just a little bit smaller, and so there were 2 layers of the pennies. And when I get done, I'll go and show you the quilt so you can see how I did it. And of course you can use your imagination and do it however you'd like, but this is kind of a nice little rainbow of colors that you can do those little pennies in between. There's also a really cute bird that she has in her pattern, and you can use that as a template for the bird in this border. And you should have plenty of wools from the center portion of your block that we did last month to do that bird. If you don't, let me know and we can get some more for you. I, however, found this little bird in a piece of fabric and decided that I was going to use it as the bird instead. So I put one of these in each of your kits, and you're welcome to do whichever you would like. And the way that I added this to the quilt is I just fussy cut around it using a 1/4 inch seam, and then I appliqued it on. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, you could always put some fusible on the back and do a little stitch around it on the machine and add it that way. But I think that the bird's really cute, and I think that was a really fun addition to the quilt. So you can do it either way. I also thought that I would show you just a few stitches this month. Our class last time was so long that it seemed like we didn't have enough time to talk about stitches. So I thought I would take just a few minutes today and talk about stitches that you could use. There's a wonderful tutorial that is available for you because of our quarantines right now. One really good source is Sue Spargo, and she is doing what she calls an Insta Stitch with Sue, and it's on either Instagram or Facebook. So all you'd have to do is follow Sue Spargo on Instagram or Facebook, and each day she does a little tutorial on a different stitch or a different thread or a different technique that she uses in her quilts. And many of the things that she does transfer nicely over to Wendy Williams quilts. So I would just recommend that you get on and follow Sue Spargo and look at some of those Insta Stitch with Sue. Right now, she's on day 16, but I think you can access the previous days that she's been doing, and that's really a great source. Sue Spargo also has a really wonderful book that has her stitches in it, and many of them are pretty fancy. Wendy Williams doesn't go to the depth or the technicality of all the stitches that Sue Spargo does, but she usually just uses a few simple stitches and uses them over and over, and they produce a beautiful result. So today I'm just going to show you a few. This is a little mat that is also designed by Wendy Williams. And what I've done is cut out all the little circles and layer them. And then I have whip stitched them all on using a wool thread. I carry my wool threads in a little thing like this. I have 2 of them with different colors. And then I can just pick a matching color. I pull out the one that matches the best and then whip stitch around the motifs, the circles in this instance. And I did take a class from Wendy Williams. It's been a couple of years ago. But one thing that she really loves to do is these little donuts that she puts in things. She does most of her cutouts or her circles freehand. So if she has a little piece left over from something, a little piece of wool, she takes that little piece and makes a circle and then puts those all in a little bag and keeps those to use in all of her projects. Most of the things that she does are just freehand cuts, so she doesn't use a template. After you've cut out hundreds of circles, you get pretty good at it. So she just does a freehand circle, and if they're just a little bit wonky, that just gives them a little bit more character. So I have cut out a circle right here. It's not perfect, but that's okay. And then she folds the circle in half, and in the middle she just cuts out another little circle. And actually this one turned out pretty good. Not perfect. I can make it a little bit more perfect, but you can see how it makes a little donut shape. And she uses these a lot when she does her little circles. So you can see in this one, in many cases, that there are those little donuts on top of another piece of wool. And then that's after they're all laid down and stitched on, then we can start embellishing. Oh, there's a little extra one right there that I cut. These are actually, this one right here is just one layer on top of another layer on top of another layer. But this one right here, you can see, is the red underneath and then the donut shape on top with the center cut out. So it gives the same effect as layering on top of another on top of another. One of the stitches that Wendy Williams uses a lot is the fly stitch. And there are a couple of ways you can use a fly stitch. I have some thread here. This is a Valdani thread in a pink, and Valdani's come in a little spool like this. This is a little purple one. Here's the pink one right here. And you can use different sizes. I think the one I prefer is probably the 8. Sometimes I use 3, which is just a little bit heavier. But the 8 is usually my preference. It gives you enough weight that you can see it and it's not too heavy. I really like these Pearl Cottons also because they're just one strand, and so you don't have them separating like you would with maybe a DMC thread or another kind of cotton thread. So it's just one strand. So what I'm going to do here, I've got this pink one, and I'd like to pick a color that has a little bit of contrast with the pink. So maybe I'll do it on this one right here that's kind of the light blue. So if I'm doing a fly stitch, these don't have to be all perfectly the same. In fact, I kind of like it if it's just a little bit wonky. What I'm going to do is start on the edge, just right off the edge of the wool right here. And then I'm gonna probably put it about 1/2 inch away on the edge of the wool, my needle. And then come up right in the middle, catching my thread. And then a long tail is gonna come up to the next circle. So you can see the fly stitch right there. And what I'm gonna do with this fly stitch is go all the way around the circle using that same stitch. So I'll go right in here next to where I just nest this one next to that stitch on the edge of my circle. They're about 1/2 inch, maybe a little bit more apart. I'm gonna catch my thread and then come in again to the middle. If you do this all the way around, it really makes a fun look. And I have used this stitch a lot when I've done my Wendy Williams circles. Let me do just a couple here, and then you can kind of see how they look. I don't always do them, like I mentioned, exactly the same size, because sometimes it gives a little bit more interest if they're not perfect. Okay, you can see how it forms kind of a pattern as you do it. And it really makes it fun, but do it in a contrasting color so you can see your stitches. You can do this on the edge like I've done here, or on the outer part of the circle, or you can do them all coming in towards the middle, and that's really fun too. And I'll show you some of them on the quilt that I've done that way. So that's really one fun stitch that you can use. When I'm using the Pearl Cottons or a little bit heavier thread, I like to use, let me see, where do my needles go? They are here, there they are. I can use a chenille 24. This is a Sue Spargo brand, but sometimes if the thread's just a little bit heavier, then I'll go to a 22 chenille, which it's just a little bit larger needle, and that will accommodate the larger thread. This is really a fun thread that I'd like using on the Wendy Williams. This one is called, it comes in a package like this, but I always take them out and wind them on something so that they don't get all tangled. This one is Painter's Thread, and it's called Painter's Shimmer. And it has one little thread that goes through it that makes it just a tiny bit sparkly. It's not too much sparkle, just a little bit. And I really love just using a little bit of sparkle in her things. I have one right here that I've already threaded, and I always put a quilter's knot at the end of my thread because we're working with wool a lot, and it's the knots tend to go through a lot easier if you don't have that larger quilter's knot. Let's see. Another stitch I wanted to show you is one that Wendy Williams uses. And instead of doing just a running stitch, you know, like up and down, like you would do a quilter's stitch, she does one that she calls a running back stitch. So what she does is she takes the thread and does a back stitch, and you don't want to make these really tiny. You want to make them a little bit larger so they actually show up. So she does a back stitch. I came up into the wool, and then I do a back stitch, and then I come forward 2 stitches instead of 1, leaving a space between the stitches. If you're doing a regular back stitch, then you go back into the same hole that you ended that other stitch. But when you're doing a running back stitch, you come forward farther. So what you end up with is a stitch, let's see, can we see it there? That looks like a running stitch, but it's actually a back stitch. And it just gives more definition to the stitch if you do it as a running back stitch rather than just a running stitch. So that's another fun idea to use in her things. And I wouldn't put it right on the edge, maybe put it in between the 2 colors, between the 2 edges, so it'll show up a little bit more. You probably can't see the sparkle, but that one has just a tiny bit of sparkle to it. My other favorite stitch to do on Wendy Williams things is just the chain stitch. Now, it seems like most of us have done a lazy daisy stitch at some time in our lives. And a chain stitch is just a lazy daisy stitch, except you just chain them together. So I'm going to get a piece of purple right here and just show you the chain stitch. One thing I like about the chain stitch is that it actually gives you a double thread as you're doing it. So it's a little bit more defined than just a back stitch or some other stitch. Let's try it right here. Well, let's do it somewhere where it's going to show up a little bit better. I'm going to put another quilter's knot in there. Instead of matching, Sue Spargo does a lot of matching with threads, and Wendy Williams really talks a lot about contrast, and I think contrast is really fun because your stitches really show up. So in this one, I'm going just to do a chain stitch around this edge here. So it's like a lazy daisy, except I'm going to come back into the same hole when I finish my lazy daisy and back up. I would recommend that all of you have some kind of a stitching guide, because I have to go back to the stitching guide when I'm doing the stitches to remind myself how to do it, especially some of the more difficult stitches. So have some kind of a guide with you that you can refresh your memory. Another thing you can always do is go onto YouTube and Google the name of the stitch, and there are many tutorials for all of the stitches. And sometimes I'll just sit and follow along with the person who's doing the stitch. But you can see how that one makes a really fun. That's the chain stitch right there, and it's just a contrasting stitch, and it'll make a really fun one going around there. You'll be doing a lot of embellishment on this quilt, if you choose to. And so practice some of these stitches, and they don't have to be really elaborate ones. I would recommend that you just stick with the same basic 4 or 5 stitches and repeat them over and over, using possibly different threads and different colors. Another thread I really love is this one, and this is called Silk and Pearl, and it is 100% silk, and because it's silk, it does have just a little bit of sheen to it. And for those of us who do Sue Spargo or Wendy Williams stitching, this is probably one of our very favorite threads. It's just a little bit heavier, and the silk does have just a tiny bit of sheen to it when you use it. It has a beautiful twist, and it's one of my very favorite threads to use. And I will mix the pearl cottons and the silken pearls and use them together, it makes a beautiful product. So that's another thing that you might consider, and we do have quite a few of these on hand in the shop. I'm going to take you in to look at the quilt and just show you a few things on it before I end today. And if you do have questions or have any comments about our class or about the blocks, I'd be happy to help answer them for you. So just give me a call here at the shop and they let me know that you've called, and I can try to help answer the questions for you. I'm not in the shop all the time now because of the quarantine, but they are happy to get a hold of me. So let me just show you some of the pieces I wanted to show you on the quilt. Okay, you can see how on the orange pills, instead of the little birds, I've put the little wool circles in different colors. And I've just put a small one inside the larger one and applicate them on. So you should have enough in your kit to do that. And this is also just a photo of the bird. Let's see if I can get him there. Yep, there he is, of the bird that I applicate on there. I did add this little piece right here is actually a piece of wool, and I added these little berries and flowers onto him. They're wool. They're not in the fabric, the cotton fabric. So you can do him, or you can use the pattern that is in your kit. And that is our block of the month for Sue Spargo, month 2. If you have questions, just let me know. And good luck and have fun and stay well in quarantine. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.